David was, according to the books of Samuel, the second king of the United Kingdom of Israel, and according to the New Testament, an ancestor of Jesus. His life is conventionally dated to c. 1040 to 970 BCE, his reign over Judah c. 1010 to 970 BCE. The books of Samuel, 1 Kings, and 1 Chronicles are the only Old Testament sources of information on David. Although the Tel Dan Stela contains the phrase, "Readers, House of David," which many scholars confirm to be a likely plausible match to the existence in the mid-9th century BCE of a Judean royal dynasty called the House of David, depicted as a valorous warrior of great renown, and a poet and musician credited for composing much of the psalms contained in the Book of Psalms. King David is widely viewed as a righteous and effective king in battle and civil justice. He is described as a man after God's own heart in 1 Samuel chapter 13 verse 14 and Acts chapter 13 verse 22. David is an important figure to members of the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic faiths. Biblical tradition maintains the Messiah's direct descent from the line of David. In Islam, David is considered a prophet. Biblical narrative. Saul rejected. According to the biblical narrative, Israel is at first ruled by judges, but the people demand a monarchy, so the current judge, the prophet Samuel, reluctantly appoints Saul to be the first king of Israel. Although successful at first, Saul eventually loses favor with God by disobeying directives conveyed through Samuel. Samuel tells Saul that God has rejected him as king, and will give the kingdom instead to a man after my own heart, who is better than you. Samuel goes to Bethlehem on the pretext of performing a sacrifice, in fact intending to appoint Saul's successor from among the sons of Jesse of Bethlehem. Samuel examines 7 of Jesse's sons, but says to him, "The Lord has not chosen these," and inquires if Jesse has any other sons. Jesse's youngest son, David, is sent for where he is tending the flocks. When Samuel sees David, the Lord says, "Rise and anoint him, this is the one." At Saul's court, the Bible presents 2 accounts of how David came to become part of Saul's household. In 1 Samuel chapter 16 verses 14 to 23, Saul takes David into his service as his armor-bearer. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, David is officially presented to Saul as the hero who killed Goliath, according to French scholar André Lemaire. This may represent an amalgamation of different traditions concerning the early relationship between David and Saul. Saul is tormented by an evil spirit from the Lord, which afflicts him with episodes of deep melancholy which only music can ease. David is recommended as a skilled musician and summoned to the court. Saul makes David one of his armor-bearers, a high honor. From then on, whenever the evil spirit from God comes upon Saul, David plays music, the evil spirit leaves him. David and Goliath. According to 1 Samuel chapter 17, the men of Israel, under King Saul, faced the Philistines near the valley of Elah. The 2 armies are encamped within sight of each other for several days, but battle has not been joined. Instead, the Philistines' champion, the giant Goliath, issues daily challenges to single combat. David arrives in camp, sent by his father to bring provisions to his brothers with the army. He hears Goliath's challenge and comments that the uncircumcised Philistine should not insult the army of the living God. Brought to the king, he expresses confidence that he can defeat Goliath, just as he has a lion and a bear that threatened the flock. Before the ordeal, David picks 5 smooth stones from a nearby brook to use as ammunition. During the duel, he avoids Goliath's thrown spear and easily kills him with his sling, afterward removing the giant's head with his own sword as the Philistines flee in terror. Saul inquires about the name of the young champion's father, and David tells him that he is the son of Jesse. In 2 Samuel chapter 22, David credits God for delivering him from the hand of the Philistines and saving him from the snares of death. In his psalm, David's Song of Praise, 2 Samuel chapter 21 verse 19 states that Goliath was killed by Elhanan son of Jair from Bethlehem. Most likely, storytellers displaced the deed from the otherwise obscure Elhanan onto the more famous character, David and Jonathan. Saul makes David a commander over his armies and offers him his daughter Michal in marriage for a bride price of 100 Philistine foreskins. Intending that David will die and trying to remove them, instead he brings back 200 foreskins, saying, "God was with me." David is increasingly successful and increasingly popular, and Saul begins to see him as a threat. Saul repeatedly tries to arrange for David's death, but the plots only endeared David further to the people, and especially to his friend, Saul's son Jonathan. Jonathan warns David of his father's plots. David flees into the wilderness at the head of a band of followers. During this time, as a fugitive from King Saul, David becomes a vassal of the Philistine king Achish of Gath, for which Achish gives him the border town of Ziklag. Despite being in the employ of their enemy, David maintains good relations with the Israelites by defending them from the Amalekites. When Achish marches against the Israelites, his nobles question David's loyalty, pointing out that if David turns on him during the battle he could win back Saul's favor. So he is excused from the battle and left behind to guard the camp. Proclaimed king, Jonathan and Saul are killed in battle with the Philistines at Mount Gilboa. David travels to Hebron, where he is anointed king. In the north, Saul's son Ishbosheth is anointed king by Abner. War ensues until Ishbosheth is murdered. The assassins bring his head to David hoping for a reward, but David executes them for their crime. With the death of Saul's son, the elders of Israel come to Hebron and David is anointed king over a united Israel. Jerusalem and the Davidic covenant. David conquers the Jebusite fortress of Jerusalem, and makes it his capital. He brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, intending to build a temple. However, the prophet Nathan forbids him to build a temple because he has shed too much blood, but prophesies that the temple would be built by one of his sons. Nathan also prophesies that God has made a covenant with the house of David. Your throne shall be established forever. David wins more victories over the Philistines, and the Moabites, and Hadadezer of Zobah pays tribute. Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite with his army in the field under the command of his general Joab. David then sends a letter to Joab with instructions that his reply be carried by Uriah. When Uriah arrives at the capital, David detains him, assuming that he will take the opportunity to sleep with his wife. But Uriah refuses to do so while his men are sleeping in the field. So David sends him back to the front with a second message instructing Joab to arrange for Uriah to die in battle. With Uriah disposed of, David marries the widow, who bears their child, but the narrative comments, "But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord." The prophet Nathan confronts David and prophesies the punishment that shall fall upon him. "The sword shall never depart from your house," apparently meaning that he will always be troubled by war. "The son born to you will die, and that God will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight." When the child falls ill, David desperately prays for his recovery with such disturbing expressions, grief, that when the child dies, the servants are at first afraid to tell him out of concern for his sanity. But upon learning his son has died, David promptly recovers himself, explaining, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live, but now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me." David's son Absalom rebels. David's son Absalom stole the hearts of the people, and rebelled. David flees Jerusalem, leaving his servant Hushai behind in Absalom's court as a double agent. Ahithophel, formerly David's chief advisor, advises Absalom to strike before David has time to gather his forces. Hushai persuades Absalom to wait and build up his own forces before facing his formidable father. When Ahitophel sees his counsel rejected, he correctly surmises the cause is lost and hangs himself. Absalom has a tent pitched on the palace roof, in which he takes his father's consorts, thus fulfilling Nathan's prophecy. The rebellion ends at the Battle of the Wood of Ephraim. Absalom's forces are routed, leaving him behind with his flowing locks tangled in the branches of a terebinth tree, where he is found and killed by David's general Joab. When the news of the victory is brought to David, he is grief-stricken and laments, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom! Would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son!" Joab reprimands him for his excessive show of grief in the face of victory. Death. With David old and bedridden, Adoniah, his eldest surviving son and natural heir, declares himself king. Bathsheba, David's favorite wife, and Nathan the prophet go to David and obtain his agreement that Bathsheba's son Solomon should become king. David counsels Solomon to begin his reign with a massacre, naming numerous men to be purged, including his longtime general Joab, who had offended him years previously. Family. According to tradition, David was born in Bethlehem, in the territory of the tribe of Judah. His grandfather was Abed, whose mother was the Moabite Ruth, and whose grandmother was the former prostitute Rahab. David's father was Jesse. His mother is not named in the Bible, but the Talmud identifies her as Nitzaveh, daughter of Adul. David had 6 older brothers and 2 sisters, Zeruiah and Abigail. David cemented his relations with various political and national groups through marriage. He had 8 wives. Michal, the second daughter of King Saul, Ahinoam the Jezreelite, Abigail the Carmelite, previously wife of Nabal, Marsha, daughter of Talmi, king of Geshur, Haggith, Abital, Eglah, and Bathsheba. The Book of Chronicles lists his sons by various wives and concubines. In Hebron, David had 6 sons: Amnon, by Ahinoam; Daniel, by Abigail; Absalom, by Marsha; Adoniah, by Haggith; Shephatiah, by Abital; and Ithream, by Eglah. By Bathsheba, his sons were Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, and Solomon. David's sons born in Jerusalem by other wives included Ivar, Elishua, Elipholet, Noga, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, and Eliada. Jerimoth, who is not mentioned in any of the genealogies, is mentioned as another of his sons in 2 Chronicles chapter 11 verse 18. David also had at least one daughter, Tamar, by Marsha. Given that Nathan prophesies, in punishment for his sin with Bathsheba, that the Lord will take his wives and give them to his neighbor, Solomon may not have been David's son at all, but later editors may have amended the story to emphasize Nathan's other statement that, "The sword shall never depart from your house." Historicity. Archaeology. 2 archaeological finds, the Tel Dan Stela and the Mesha Stela, have direct bearing on the question of the existence of a historical David. The first of these is an Aramaean victory stela discovered in 1993 at Tel Dan and dated c. 850–835 BCE. It contains the phrase, which has been interpreted as, "House of David." The Mesha Stela from Moab, dating from approximately the same period, may also contain the name David in line 12, where the interpretation is uncertain, and in line 31, where one destroyed letter must be supplied. But apparently no other letter produces a word that makes sense in the context. The evidence from surface surveys indicates that Judah at the time of David was a small tribal kingdom. The Bronze and Iron Age remains of the city of David, the original urban core of Jerusalem identified with the reigns of David and Solomon, were investigated extensively in the 1970s and 1980s under the direction of Yigal Shiloh of the Hebrew University, who failed to discover significant evidence of occupation during the 10th century BCE. In 2005, Eilat Mazza reported the discovery of a large stone structure which she claimed was David's palace, but the site is contaminated and cannot be accurately dated. In December 2014, archaeologists from Mississippi State University announced the discovery of 6 bulli, which suggests that some type of government activity was being conducted in the 10th century, and thus support the existence of David. Although the bulli do not mention David or Jerusalem or Judah or Israel, and there is no way of knowing who produced them or for what purpose. Academic views on the biblical account. The biblical account about David comes from the books of Samuel and the books of Chronicles. Chronicles merely retells Samuel from a different theological vantage point, and contains little information not available there, and the biblical evidence for David is therefore dependent almost exclusively on the material contained in the chapters from 1 Samuel chapter 16 to 1 Kings 2. Since Martin Noth put forward his analysis of the Deuteronomistic history, biblical scholars have accepted that these 2 books form part of a continuous history of Israel, compiled no earlier than the late 7th century BCE, but incorporating earlier works and fragments. Samuel's account of David seems to have undergone 2 separate acts of editorial slanting. The original writers show a strong bias against Saul, and in favor of David and Solomon. Many years later, the Deuteronomists edited the material in a manner that conveyed their religious message, inserting reports and anecdotes that strengthened their monotheistic doctrine. Some of the materials in Samuel I and II, notably the boundary, allotment and administrative lists, are believed to be very early, since they correspond closely to what we know of the territorial conditions of the late Davidic early Solomonic period. Beyond this, the full range of possible interpretations is available. The late John Bright, in his History of Israel, takes Samuel at face value. Donald B. Redford, however, thinks all reconstructions from biblical sources for the United Monarchy period are examples of academic wishful thinking. Thomas L. Thompson rejects the historicity of the biblical narrative. The history of Palestine and of its peoples is very different from the Bible's narratives, whatever political claims to the contrary may be. An independent history of Judea during the I and I II periods has little room for historicizing readings of the stories of I2 Samuel and I Kings. Amichai Mazur, however, concludes that based on recent archaeological findings, like those in City of David, Khirbet Qeiyathot, Tel Dan, Tel Rehov, Khirbet en Nahas and others, the deconstruction of United Monarchy and the devaluation of Judah as a state in 9th century is unacceptable interpretation of available historic data. According to Mazur, based on archaeological evidences, United Monarchy can be described as a state in development. Some studies of David have been written. Baruch Halpern has pictured David as a lifelong vassal of Achish, the Philistine king of Gath. Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman have identified as the oldest and most reliable section of Samuel those chapters which describe David as the charismatic leader of a band of outlaws who captures Jerusalem and makes it his capital. Stephen Mackenzie, associate professor of the Hebrew Bible at Rhodes College and author of King David, a biography, states the belief that David actually came from a wealthy family, was ambitious and ruthless, and a tyrant who murdered his opponents, including his own sons. Critical Bible scholarship holds that the biblical account of David's rise to power is a political apology, an answer to contemporary charges against him, of his involvement in murders and regicide. Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman reject the idea that David ruled over a united monarchy, suggesting instead that he ruled only as a chieftain over the southern kingdom of Judah, much smaller than the northern kingdom of Israel at that time. They posit that Israel and Judah were still polytheistic in the time of David and Solomon, and that much later 7th century redactors sought to portray a past golden age of a united, monotheistic monarchy in order to serve contemporary needs. They note a lack of archaeological evidence for David's military campaigns and a relative underdevelopment of Jerusalem, the capital of Judah. compared to a more developed and urbanized Samaria, capital of Israel. Jacob L. Wright, associate professor of Hebrew Bible at Emory University, has written that the most popular legends about David, including his killing of Goliath, his affair with Bathsheba, and his ruling of a united kingdom of Israel rather than just Judah, are the creation of those who lived generations after him, in particular those living in the late Persian or Hellenistic period. Physical descriptions. 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 12 says, "And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he." 1 Samuel chapter 17 verses 41 to 43 says, "And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David, with his shield-bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance." The Hebrew word for ruddy, used in the above passages, is admona, from the root adm. Admona, reddish-brown, was the ideal color for men, and indicates David's heroic nature.